Between 2010 and 2020, 89 people died climbing Mount Everest, and that number is going up at an alarming rate. Why? Because interest in climbing the world's highest peak is at an all-time high. So far, a record number of climbing permits have been issued for people attempting to climb Mount Everest in 2023. Now, the attraction to climbing Mount Everest is incredibly clear. It's not just one of the most dominant natural features in the world. It's also the fact that climbing to the summit of this mountain, the highest point anywhere on the planet, provides a kind of rush and feeling of achievement that very few other things can match. And because of this attraction, Mount Everest has evolved into the ultimate destination for thousands of people across the world. That popularity has resulted in a multi-million-dollar industry being built around this mountain. But how exactly does this industry operate? And at what cost? Today, I'm breaking down the cost of climbing Mount Everest. So let's get into it. In 2023, at least 900 people will try to climb Mount Everest. And if that number sounds high, that's because it is. It's a record number of people to attempt climbing the mountain in a single year. And it perfectly captures how the business of climbing Mount Everest has exploded in recent years. So how much does it cost to climb the mountain? It all starts with getting a climbing permit. Now, Mount Everest is located in both China and Nepal, but most people climb the mountain on the Nepal side. So we'll focus on analyzing the economics of Mount Everest on the Nepal side. The cost of a climbing permit from the Nepalese government is around $11,000, but that's not the only fee the government charges. In addition to the permit, climbers will also need to pay about $3,000 to cover fees for a liaison officer who will certify the climb, for Nepalese climbers who will secure the route, and also for administrative charges like a garbage deposit to fund efforts to clean up the mountain. Once all the licensing and permit fees are made, another set of costs a climber will incur is for the climbing gear and equipment. Getting the right climbing shoes, gloves, and clothes can literally be the difference between life and death on Everest, and those things don't come cheap. And because the summit of the mountain is 8,800 meters above sea level, climbers are also subject to one of the rules of atmospheric pressure on the planet. The higher you go, the less oxygen you get. Now, if you think you can sort out the permits and the gear and then simply show up to climb Mount Everest, well, think again. Most climbers also have to pay specialist agencies to guide them on the journey to the top of the world. Now, these climbing agencies typically cover the logistics, including the permit payments, but also crucially, they hire expert climbers called Sherpas, who literally take clients to the summit of Mount Everest. The Sherpas are legendary expert climbers native to the Himalayas mountains where Everest is located, and they play a fundamental role in the economics of Mount Everest, as they not only guide climbers on the way up and down the mountain, but they also make the climb possible by fixing in ropes and ladders in key spots along the climbing route. And when things go wrong, they also bravely rescue climbers from certain death on the mountain as well. When you factor in the cost of permits, gear, and hiring a guide, then climbing Mount Everest can cost anywhere between $35,000 per person on the low end to $160,000 per person on the high end, with the average cost by climber being somewhere around $66,000. But that doesn't include the cost of travel to Nepal, with flights first to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, and then to Khumbu, the Nepalese region where the route to climb Everest is located. The big business of climbing Mount Everest has spawned an entire industry around the mountain. From the government, which earns millions of dollars per year from issuing climbing permits, and of course climbing agencies that charge over $50,000 per climber, to the Sherpas who climb the world's highest mountain just to make a living. There's also the impact in the Khumbu region as well, where Everest is located. Now, according to some estimates, the population in the region can go from 40,000 people in the off-season to 700,000 people during the peak climbing season. For Nepal, it's a bit tricky to quantify just how much Everest generates in revenue for the country, but economists estimate that Nepal's tourism industry accounts for around 10% of its entire economy, and Mount Everest is by far the biggest tourist attraction. The emergence of this commercial side of Everest, with agencies to organize logistics and local Sherpas to guide the climb, carry gear and oxygen tanks, and also take care of the climbers, means that it's now a lot easier to climb the world's highest mountain. And this means a lot more people are reaching the summit of the mountain than ever before. So let's take a look at the numbers. The first recorded summit of Mount Everest happened in 1953, and throughout the 1950s, a total of 6 summits were recorded. But that number has drastically changed, going from 6 people in the 1950s to more than 5,500 people throughout the 2010s. That's an astonishing increase, and it shows just how many more people are climbing and reaching the summit of Mount Everest. But when you consider that the main climbing season for Mount Everest typically runs for just around 4 months every year, then you also realize that the increased interest in climbing Mount Everest is resulting in a really dangerous problem, and that is overcrowding. The problem is best captured by this photograph, showing a long queue of climbers waiting to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Now, what you're looking at is a human traffic jam close to the highest point in the world. The danger of this picture lies in the fact that this area they are waiting in is literally called the dead zone on Everest, where climbers often suffer from altitude sickness and exhaustion. More importantly, given the lower oxygen levels at the top of the mountain, every minute these climbers wait in the dead zone means that their oxygen levels will reduce and their chances of dying will increase. But despite how troubling this photo is, it doesn't look like the overcrowding problem on Everest is going away anytime soon. Nepal has issued over 450 permits to climb Everest this year alone, which is an all-time record. And with climbers typically going on the journey with Sherpa guides, it will mean that more than 900 people will climb Everest this year. Another reason for the overcrowding problem is the fact that even though climbing Everest is extremely dangerous and difficult, there's very little regulation of the climbing agencies taking people up the mountains.
Well, in fact, there's no regulation on who can offer a commercial expedition to Mount Everest. Other companies with no experience, no relevant qualifications to be offering a Mount Everest expedition, but because there's no regulation from the government on who can offer these trips, they can offer the expedition and people will sign up without having done their homework.
With very little regulation in place, these climbing agencies are increasingly taking on climbers who don't have the required experience as long as they can pay the fee.
People want to make money, so some expedition don't refuse clients. They don't do a screen up. So some people don't have any experience. They end up on the mountain.
To be clear, this regulation issue is mainly to the Nepal side. For example, wild climbers on the China side will only receive a permit if they have previously climbed another 8,000-foot mountain. Nepal does not have similar rules, meaning more inexperienced people apply to climb Everest from the Nepal side. The best case scenario of the overcrowding problem on Everest is a delay in reaching the summit of the mountain. But the worst case scenario is death.
You've got 80 or 90 people in front of you, you're in pitch darkness. An hour and a half later, there's a body, that is attached to the anchor point where two lines meet, and every single person that was climbing to the summit had to climb over that deceased climber. And you realize that, what happened to them could potentially happen to you, and you're in a state of survival.
As more people climb the mountain in a very short period of time, deaths are now occurring on Mount Everest at an alarming rate. So far in the 2023 climbing season, 12 people have been confirmed dead, with 5 more missing and presumed dead. For comparison, the average number of annual deaths on Everest from 1993 to 2022 is only 6.2 deaths. With 17 people already confirmed or presumed dead, the March to May climbing season in 2023 has now become the deadliest season ever recorded on Mount Everest, more than the 16 people that died in 2014 and the 15 people that died in 1996. Today, with advanced climbing gear and support personnel that can be hired, climbing Mount Everest is easier than it's ever been. Yet, the paradox is that the growing interest in climbing the mountain means it has also become much more dangerous. The financial cost of climbing Everest runs into millions of dollars per year, but the human cost is also climbing as well, with more people dying than ever before. Throughout history, humans have loved Mount Everest for being the world's highest mountain. But as the deaths pile up due to overcrowding and recklessness, we may soon grow to hate it for being the world's highest graveyard.
It's a circus right now, and something has to be done.